So a quick-ish video of how to assemble the Fantastic Plastic Mark 1 Arc Reactor kit. If you get the one with the stand, we'll start with that. To start off, for plastic pieces, depending on the layer lines or your preference, I usually start with a reciprocating sander on the lowest setting, and I usually use around like a 60 or 80 grit to get rid of heavy layer lines. I use a higher resolution for the parts for the listings I have, so you might not need that so much as just using 400 grit just to sand it down real well. And then I usually use this Rust-Oleum 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. There's other primers out there that aren't sandable, but look for a filler primer that says that it's sandable. I've had other ones where it's not as good as this one. It doesn't sand as well. And when you're doing this, I usually do about 4 to 5 coats, 4 minimum, with sanding in between. When you're sanding though, and you notice that the primer is gumming up on the sandpaper, that means you need to wait and let it dry a little further. It should come off as a fine powder when it's completely dry. And plus two, you don't want to have uncured coats of primer underneath any paint, because that will give you issues later, for sure. The base to start off is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces. So you get your main base, and then you get the main little post. You have this backer piece that mounts, and I just use a regular little screw. I think it's either a, I would say probably a 632 if I had to guess, size screw, but just whatever you have that fits, you know, just so that you can mount it and put it at the angle you want. I start off, I glue this one together already, but I put this face down and put a little bit of, I use a 2-part epoxy by Loctite. Super glue works. Me personally, it's a little harder with super glue. Sometimes you get that haziness, cloudiness, which looks like crap. With this, you don't get that. I know there's other super glues that are better, but with this, super glue needs air to do its chemical reaction to dry and harden. With this, as soon as this is mixed, within 10 to 15 minutes, it's solid. So if you do like the base here and there's not enough air that's getting inside of there, it'll take even longer for super glue. So I suggest an epoxy like this one. It works great. And you know, just get a little mixing thing like this. I use a popsicle stick, mix it up, use a toothpick to apply or what have not. So start with putting this face down and gluing this center ring in. And you'll notice there's an inner lip, so make sure to glue it this direction and not, you know, have the inner lip the other way. And then once that sits, you can put this top ring on. Again, it has that inner lip you want to keep an eye out for. And when that's all glued together, and that way if you put it on a flat surface, you can get, you know, it glued correctly. When you're gluing this back part on, I marked it a little bit right here, just where the base needs to go so that it's not off center. Let that dry, glue your base on, you know, make sure that, you know, the hole's going this way and it's not off center. You know, measure twice, cut once. Get that assembled, set that aside. You have your little plug for the arc reactor. You can find some red, white, blue cables and whatnot to glue into here and affix in the back of the arc reactor when you're done, and just kind of lay the wire hanging off to the side. You could also get plexiglass cut if you want a box to fit around this, and you see this inner slot here, kind of similar to the arc reactor back here. You know, you can have that professionally cut and it looks really good when it's done. I usually start off with, you can start with the main ring here and glue the little segments on. You'll notice when you get your ring that there's an inlay on this. So you can't, you know, it's hard to mess up. These parts will fit right on. And so glue all those on. You can either, for the copper part, few different ways. You can either paint it the copper color, or you can get either a copper wire, or what's almost easiest is there's this copper, flat copper tape almost that has a sticky back to it. That would probably be the easiest to wrap around these, you know, cut it to size. That way you don't have to go all the way around, and it won't be as thick on the back. Just because you need to fix this ring on the back, you'll notice that these 3 tabs, normally that would go into the ring, but the holes in the ring didn't come out as well as I wanted them to. I mean, you could drill those if you wanted to, but I suggest to put it like this. You know, if you want to cut these little nubs off and just glue it flush to the back of this, because when you're done the cage, this is one of the segments of the cage, they will glue right here to hold the front of this on. So once you have this all together, I would work on the back piece here, or this piece. We'll go to this piece first. There's these little segments here that you can glue on. Just make sure you're getting it on the back side here. Line them up with the little holes. Glue those flush. And once you get that setting, you can set that aside and work on this guy. You can start with the back. Glue on the fan in this back donut-like piece. Make sure they're centered as best as you can. Go to the front here. The little mesh piece of the almost sink strainer, I guess you could call it. That's pretty much a press fit. I mean, you can glue it if you want to, but I just press fit it in. These rings have a little staircase right here that they fit on. So you get the bottom mesh, and then you get ring 1, 2, 3, and then 4. There's 4 rings. I suggest to put little dabs of glue there, and then put each ring in, let it sit. This top slotted ring, I didn't have to glue it. It fits snugly on these 3 posts here, and push it down until it almost hits the top of this little staircase here that holds the middle rings. And once you have that all glued together, I would wait to put this last, just so that you can put this like this to start doing the cage. And the cage has this back geared piece, this ring that goes around the whole thing when it's done, and then you have 10 of the smaller segments and 10 of the bigger segments. I suggest to start with the bigger segments. Lay this on top. I would put glue here and affix that down and center it as best as you can. And then each of these segments, before you glue this down though, I suggest to line up at least 3 or 4 of these, because they fit just like this. So you get a slot here, and then you have the opposing slot here. Now, you want to make sure it's every other one. So you'll have these smaller ones that fit here that are just free floating. I suggest to put these last. So again, get some of these big ones and go maybe like every other segment and fit them into place, just so that you get the spacing correct and you don't have this, you know, cockeyed too much that it's not going to line up with this when you go to glue it together. And make sure you glue it in between the spaces here, so like this is lined up. And once you get all of these on, which I'll cover in the next little video, we'll start by putting these on and then putting this last ring over the whole back of the cage. So now I glued this in place. So I put a little glue behind here, and I used 3 of the arms, the bigger arms, to kind of get it in the right orientation so that they line up with their opposing notches. Because every other notch on here is going to be a big arm, and then every other notch is going to be the smaller arms. So now that's glued in place. We can take those off. So that's all one piece now. And we can slowly put each of the arms on. So again, I would use a little toothpick and put a little dab of glue here, and then on the opposing notch, and glue each one of these on one by one, like so. Go all the way around to make the cage. See? It's starting to look like something. And then once you have that all glued together, we're gonna get to the smaller arms, which are a little bit more tricky, but I'll show you in the next step the best way to put those on. All right, so here I skipped ahead and I assembled the whole back cage. So, the last thing I said was gluing each one of the long arms on, one by one. Once you get that solidified, so glue the middle piece on, use 3 of the arms to get it in the right orientation, and then get all the big arms glued on, because they hold in 2 spots, on the clear acrylic part here and on the gear part here. Once that's solidified, then move on to the smaller arms. A little bit trickier. I usually just use some of this 3M tape, and I rip up a bunch of little pieces, and I'll get my glue ready with my toothpick, put a little in the toothpick, glue it in each knot, or the small notch that's going to connect to the gear here, and then put a little tape to hold it in place, because you want the arm to kind of be level with the 2 longer arms that are next to it. Because again, these arms are going to be kind of freestanding, so having a little piece of tape will hold it in place. And once you go all the way around and use tape to hold them in place while they glue, it'll be about 8 to 10 minutes before it's tacky enough that you can start taking the tape off. I would wait a good 15 minutes until it's fully cured. Take all your tape off. And then this ring here, what I did was, again, I put a little glue on the end of the toothpick, and I put a little glue right here on each one of the small arms. And then I put the ring on and let that dry, step-by-step process. That way the ring's on there, it's supporting the smaller arms here, and everything's hunky-dory. So now you get this all assembled as one piece. Now, if you want to go ahead at this point, it's up to you, but use red, black, and white cables in here. Find some wire that's, I don't know, around 22 gauge, and I fix them here and stick them in the back here. You can also fit in an LED in the middle here, an ultra bright LED, and that should light up the whole middle of the core. So once you get all that installed and get this on here, then we'll go on to these 2 pieces. So we have put this all together in the first step. And then you got these little spacers here that'll need to be glued in place. So I just align them with the hole, put a little glue, let it sit like this. When this is solidified like this, then you can put this guy up on here. What I would do is I would put a little glue on the tops of these with your toothpick. Again, I didn't mention this before, but preferably rough up each surface slightly with some 400 grit sandpaper, even after you paint it. Just enough to give it enough grit so when you put the glue, it'll make a better contact when it dries. Same thing for this side, if you want to rough the spots up where it's going to touch. So put it together here and kind of line it up so that each one of these is sitting on at least part of one of those. It's not going to perfectly line up, but get as many of these affixed with glue as you can, and then rough up the ends. And then once you get this, you get the front of it that looks like this. Almost a complete arc reactor. Then get your little piece here. Now you have the 3 posts here that hold this slotted ring on. You want to put a little glue here, here, and here, and affix that in there like that. Like that. Now you have a completed arc reactor. And you can put it in the base over here, letting the wires and the cord for the little plug hang out the back. Let that sit on the side. And Tony Stark finally has a heart. Lastly, if you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of me at props@fantasticplastic3d.com. There's links right on the website. I have an Instagram page and a Facebook page. It's linked on there. They're my personal pages, so get a hold of me if you have any questions, and I'm glad to help. I'm interested to see final designs of what you come up with.